All right, we are live. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Superlative Podcast. I'm Edward Bushi. One guest, no edits, no post production, just a sharp and live conversation about what it really takes to reach higher levels and what comes next. So let's get into it. Daniela, thank you for so much for joining us in the call today. Just a quick thing. Daniela was entrepreneurial at age 16. She spent years helping some of Latin America's most ambitious founders at Endeavor, backed a company as an angel investor with a family office, and watched it become one of Latin America's recent unicorns. Before we get into your story, which is amazing, uh, what is New Ventures Capital and what are you building right now? And then we'll come back to that.
Great. So, Edward, first of all, thank you for the invitation. I am Daniela. I am speaking directly from Bogota, Colombia, as some of you can see in my background. So, it's happy to share my insights, my failures, my successes with your audience, and hopefully we can have fun in this podcast. I am the managing partner of New Ventures Capital. We build thematic funds to solve social and environmental problems. We are a strange sort of being in the sense that we mix venture capital and impact investing. We believe we can do both to generate a better society. Right now, we're managing a $20 million fund for early stage tech startups who have an impact in youth generations, one of the biggest populations in Latin America, that historically have suffered a lot of barriers in terms of financial inclusion, employment, healthcare. So we really believe that supporting youth generations is going to generate a more equitable and prosperous society in Latin America. So that's a little bit what we do.
Yeah. Thanks for that intro. I'd love to get into it, but would love to also hear your backstory. You started being entrepreneurial at age 16. What were you doing, and uh, how did that experience really led to where you are today?
I think I first come from a very entrepreneurial family. My grandfather started a bank 70 years ago. And my other grandfather was an entrepreneur in a small town in Colombia where he sold all types of appliances. So I've seen entrepreneurship at different stages, different industries. And since we were very little, my father, we are a family of three girls, it always pushed us to sort of work hard, to break that lack of opportunity sometimes that there are for women, and that meant becoming good investors and becoming entrepreneurs. So when I was 16, we traveled to Argentina and we saw this big sort of bath and body shop that had many shops. We saw there was none in Colombia. So with my father and another partner, which knew all about beauty and wellness, we launched O3, which was a shop where we sold all types of creams and lotions. We got to have three locations and did pretty well for the first 6 years. But eventually we went broke, like many entrepreneurs. We see the challenges. So having that exposure at a very young age really made me fall in love with entrepreneurs and their ability and their resilience to launch great ideas, and also helped me sort of become unafraid of failure, right? And
Mhm.
take more risks.
Yeah, that's pretty cool because like a lot of people really just take the failure event as a signal that that they give up, right? But not a lot of people persevere there, right?
Yes,
So yeah, just to clarify, you're in Bogota right now, but you're
yes,
you're not based
I am.
in Bogota, right? Oh, you're based in Bogota.
I'm
Oh,
based in
okay.
Bogota. The
Yeah.
headquarters of New Ventures Group, which is a group that has different ways of sort of catalyzing impact investing, is in Mexico. And
Oh,
the,
okay,
the
gotcha.
team that does the investments, sort of the
Yeah.
fun part, we're based in Bogota.
Oh, okay, gotcha. And that's where being in Bogota is like being in the like in for lack of a better word, the trenches where all the action is surfacing and happening. So yeah, I wanted to ask you, because you gone through so much right now. Like, what the version of Daniela who started um, at Endeavor, like the company that you're at, right? Um, you you work with what you called high impact entrepreneurs, right? So would love to understand what does that like mean, and yeah,
So I think in my career, we've had different sort of
yeah,
stages of impact investing and how's that evolved. I think at Endeavor, Colombia, and globally at Endeavor, the definition of impact is to generate growth and to
yeah,
generate employment, right? I think today at New Ventures Capital, we're looking at a more intentional impact where we actually measure sort of how are you improving people's lives beyond just growing a company and generating employment. So I think the impact investing world has this discussion every now and so where they want to really talk about what is impact and what really defines impact investing. But for
yeah.
me, it's about bridging that gap there is with traditional investing and impact investing. I think a lot of startups could be impact receive impact funding, but they're not so intentional about it. So I think impact can have different spectrums, different shades. What is important is for founders to define what change they want in the environment or in society and to pursue it in alignment with their business goals in order to really build stronger companies. I think having a good mission also helps attract employees, attract different sources of capital, create better value propositions for their clients. So sort of this mission we're at New Ventures Capital is how can we get scalable startups, exponential startups to talk about impact and how can we get them sort of more across the board is what we're seeing at a difference with many impact investors who focus more on social enterprises or enterprises who are very defined by their impact but maybe don't have scalable business models or they don't use technology so aggressively. We do believe that you need to scale to have a bigger
Mhm.
impact and to use technology as sort of that forefront to do it.
So I wanted to ask, like, when it comes to high impact entrepreneurs, is the kind of folks that you work with, like, how do you define the edge? Because you discovered, like, yes, their mission drives people to be a part of them, but like, is there an edge that you think um, traditional VCs are not really like looking at, or underseeing?
I think I think right now that the VC world and specifically in Latin America is going through this transition point on where we're really defining what is venture capital in Latin America. I think some VCs are missing certain opportunities that
Mm,
are more infrastructure. So, for example, you need internet providers for everything you're going to do with AI. So sometimes VCs could focus and could analyze better those infrastructure plays that may require a higher capital requirements and stuff like that. But it's how can we build sort of the infrastructure to have more startups build upon that. So I think a lot of VCs are in Latin America are following blindly this Silicon Valley model
mm,
uh,
that's interesting.
that
Yeah.
that is not really applicable to many parts of Latin America. So first we need to build the foundations, and then we can sort of replicate that model more accurately. But I think as we see an industry that is having tougher exits, acquisitions, there's not a public market that is developed for you to have your IPOs. We as VCs have the responsibility to iterate our investment thesis as well to be able to capture more value.
Gotcha. Yeah. So yeah, you said it yourself, right? No public markets, a difficult M&A landscape. If the exit mechanisms don't work the same way they do in the US, uh, what does the whole fund economics model look like, and how does New Ventures Capital build for that given the reality that you're in?
It's a tough question, but for example, for us, we're looking as more of infrastructure play. So not only just scalable technology, but we invested in a chain of health clinics in Mexico. So we're seeing sort of hybrid models between brick and mortar digital plays that are much more attractive for exits with private equity or consolidations, for example, specifically in the health sector. So we're seeing, for example, I don't know, a pure digital health play in Latin America could be tougher, no, to have engagement. We're sort of seeing specifically in the health sector that you do need some part of physical presence, physical
Mm,
attention in order to really break through the barriers of adoption in Latin America. So we are very contrarian in some of the deals we do. We do
mm,
lending. Still, Latin America has very few credit options for its populations. Some VCs are super allergic to lending because of the capital intensive, but that's sort of the infrastructure plays you need to do in order to build the ecosystem. We invested in a company who provides fiber optic internet in poor areas of Colombia. Some VCs sort of shine away from that, right? But we see a huge opportunity in terms of the power that telecommunication companies have, that they want to consolidate certain areas. So we see good possibles of exit there.
mm.
So I think you sort of have to push for the impact you want to create and sort of the continent you want to build, and how do we get those like foundational steps that sometimes VCs are not seeing, and we're all sort of in this journey together when it comes
Yeah.
to exits, and how can we create more market dynamics.
Yeah, so it's actually very interesting because like when I'm with my peers here, founders here, and I chat with VCs here, it's a different kind of like mentality here in North America, right? And and it's all because we have like some underlying assumptions about how the market works and how the VC market works. But for folks in Latin America, right? Like what uh what what typically are do you find, like you were talking about, uh a pure digital play doesn't work, right? Like what other insights do you find, like people don't realize when it comes to working in Latin America?
Yes, I think in terms of adoption in the healthcare system, sometimes pure, if you're doing B2C, sometimes pure digital play is tough in terms of adoption. I think a lot of trends that we see as well is sort of how are you doing those partnerships to break into the health system. So here there's
Mm,
its own peculiarities or specificities of who's your client, who's actually going to pay for the service. So I think there's a lot of good solutions, but bad distribution when it comes to how can you integrate them to the health systems in Latin America. So I think those types of things are interesting, because I think there's, I don't know, if you see a diabetes app and
mhm.
you're sort of trying to make people eat better, that sort of only digital play adoption, the markets here in Latin America, it's challenging, right? But if you could have a doctor who visits every now and then, or could talk to the person, maybe you can have like
Oh,
higher engagement. People here do feel they need to talk to a human. Still, we're still in that transition. We are very highly penetration of mobile phones. So what happened in Latin America, sort of that in North America, people had a laptop or a computer, and then the mobile phone came where you could sort of use it for everything. In Latin America, people are hyper connected to their phones, but
I can imagine. Yeah.
also at the same time is how many apps do you actually download on your phone, no? So I think a lot of the challenges for startups here is how can they integrate themselves with existing distributing partners that can sort of give that scale, because we're seeing that
Mm,
the B2C model is expensive right now. There's not that much capital. So we're seeing a lot of companies shift to B2B to C,
mm,
sort of to scale that distribution, and we think it's sort of appropriate because there's smaller customer acquisition costs. um, but I think startups are pivoting to see how can they sort of scale faster through partnerships
Yeah,
and
channel
through,
partnerships. Yeah.
yeah, channel partnerships, and through distributors or channel partnerships that could actually help them with the adoption part of their technology.
Yeah. And you mentioned like talking about like partners, right? You mentioned the medical field a lot. And I think based on our last call, it was a really big part. And especially I think of your personal thesis, right? You named a specific data point on our call, like most uh, medicines are tested on men. Women comprise 70% of the healthcare workforce, but only 4% are in managerial positions, right? So would love to like dive into that insight of yours, right?
Yes.
Because women make most of the healthcare decisions, but like it feels like they're underserved, and you see that there's opportunity here. Would love to like learn more about that.
Yes. No, I think there's huge opportunity worldwide in terms of women's health.
Mm,
Historically, women's bodies have not been studied. So every pill you take has been tested on men, or every medicine you take, it hasn't been separately, in most cases, separately tested on women because women, we have our menstruation cycles. So it was believed that it was harder to test in women due to our hormones and all this part. So we sort of been underserved historically in that testing. So women, for example, in Latin America are diagnosed later in over 2 years later in over 700 diseases. Um, Menopause is something that hasn't been studied. Doctors do not receive training on this whatsoever. So now what is happening in the demographics of Latin America? We have this aging women who are over 40, who now are productive, who now have money, and who are now facing a completely fragmented healthcare system in terms of what it could offer for them in their health. So they go to the doctor and the doctor doesn't know how to deal with their menopause. One of the biggest reasons women quit when they reach age 45, quit the workforce, is because of their menopause symptoms, and they're on their height of their career, and you're
mm,
losing all this amazing talent because there's not sufficient studies and sufficient research. So it's crazy, and you see it in a lot of sectors as well. For example, seatbelts. Seatbelts are tested only on men. Therefore, women have worse accidents because the seatbelt is tested on someone who is bigger than her or has a different body type. So for me, it was very sort of this aha moment, sort of realize. It also came when I was launching the first Women's Health Fund in Latin America, where I started learning a lot about what were the gaps in the system. And one of the biggest shocks for me was sort of this statistics that we discussed. We know that 80% of health decisions are done by women. Women take their parents to the doctors, their brothers, sort of they have this home taker role where they are worried about the health of their family. They are the basis of their health in their community. And then we have a huge workforce of women who are nurses, who are primary care workers, who are dealing with the sick people of our countries. But then there's no women's leadership that is
mm,
actually shaping these products. So when I came to see this, we launched these workshops to teach entrepreneurs in the health care the importance of having women in their teams.
mm.
So sort of working with a mental health company where 70% of their clients were women, but there was no women on the product team. There was no women developing the technology to talk to other women. So I think entrepreneurs underestimate the power of having sort of this gender equity when it comes to the healthcare sector, and are making sometimes wrong decisions because they are develop everything to talk to men, but men are not the gatekeepers. So I think having these conversations and sort of learning more about this fragmentation or the lack of articulation would build better startups that understand their customer better, which I think is sort of win-win for everyone.
Yeah. That is so like fascinating, right? Because like you always I hear about like equity in and impact, right? But like you actually put a finer point into it. You actually um, paint a picture of like in healthcare, it's very huge as a requirement. So like, is there would you be able to like for the guests and I like help understand like where specifically um, are the gaps being addressed? Do you think that's the most painful right now? And like, how do you see um, um, women using these new products? Right? Are they digital products, or are they services, or
Yes, I think women who now have a strong purchasing power are looking for products that are digital, but can also, for example, in menopause, come with hormone treatment. So very much specialized care. I think in terms of maternity, and I lived this when I had my baby girl. Um, Talking to a doctor is completely transactional.
hmm,
Women in Latin America or in Colombia specifically, there are very high rates of cesarean sections, for example. So women who
not of their choosing?
not of their choosing exactly. So in the U.S., I was pregnant with around 10 friends, and only one had a natural birth. So I think that was also my first interaction to saying, wow, they're sort of systematizing birth, because because there's a lot of men making these decisions, no?
Which is, and they're just thinking about optimization,
Yes,
right?
optimization, having the baby
Yeah.
fast, for them is more money. For example, in the States, there are still healthy statistics in terms of natural births. Um, so I think all this sort of interaction with the system has empowered women to look for more specialized services. So now it's not only about going to a gynecologist, but how is nutrition impacting your hormone imbalance, or how is mental health part of the equation. So there are startups who are building this holistic approach,
Yeah.
um, which people are willing to pay more to have a holistic approach. So I
Yeah.
think there's a huge opportunity there. And for all the startups who are working in healthcare, I think there are four ways you can integrate more women on the team. Of course, if you have a woman founder, great. Of course, there's a lot of statistics that show that when there's more women present, there are better results in terms of profitability, growth, everything. Has been studied for more than 60 years now. So I think one is bringing women into your board of directors. That's a great way to sort of start sharing insights and sort of getting this energy on board. Of course, you need to start measuring how, if you are a full male team, you should be surprised by now. You should say, why am I only attracting men
Mm.
when there are capable CTOs that are women, product growth, so women are occupying all these roles. So I think having a good assessment of your gender inequality, I think, is key, because I really do think it's about leaving money on the table. It is about having a less competitive advantage. And the other thing is to measure that all startups should be always talking to their users, right? And in love with their users.
Mm.
Are your users sometimes more women? And how are you including that in your product decisions?
Yeah.
I think it's very important. And I think the fourth category is, how can you attract women investors? How can you attract that could also be an edge for you to start having the right type of conversations about
Do
the
you
future
think?
of startup.
Uh, do you think the fourth part, getting women investors, is built on the other three, or can work independently?
I think it can work independently. I think definitely the C level part and the board of
Mm.
directors. Of course, board of directors is where there's more influence. But I think we look at the huge companies around the world. No, BlackRock, all these companies now have
Yeah.
accepted this sort of value added that women bring in these types of conversations.
No, that's really good. That it's not a good speed that change is happening, but at least like change is taking
Yes.
place. So, talking about money, right? You said something that stuck with me on the last call. It's usually not about money, right? It's usually connections and breaking barriers, right? So if that's true, what is the money for, and
I
when
think
does income? Yeah, when does the money actually get in the way? Like, you know,
I think
from
money
your
does get
perspective.
away. I think there's a saying here in Colombia that if it's a problem you can solve with money is not a problem.
Oh,
Um,
okay.
and that is something we say a lot here. But I think money comes with its responsibilities and its hazards. Of course, many startup founders here will say, I need money to succeed. They're obsessed with sort of that capital raise. But what
Hmm.
I've seen, and specifically now that we sort of passed that 220 to 21, 22 bubble in Latin America, where there was a lot of funding, valuations skyrocket, and now we're paying sort of the price of that, right?
Hmm.
We have startups in that generation or that vintage that no one is going to pay the price for. We have a series of companies that could have been successful that had a lot of down rounds, very few exits. So I think that
Brutal.
has also taught us a lot of lessons about the market. And I think sometimes entrepreneurs make big mistakes specifically when they get their ground in how they grow their teams.
Oh,
So usually, I
yeah. Would
think
love to learn
that's
more
like
about that.
that's a huge. So usually what happens is, I don't know, from C to Series A, they get $1 million. The first thing they're gonna do is hire a salesperson. So you say, wow, you're going to hire a salesperson. You've been doing this yourself the past years. You're very good at it. You're going to grow twice. You're going to double your sales because you have a new growth. You have a salesperson. What we've seen in the 18 companies we've invested in and throughout my career is that usually the sales teams are failed. It is very hard for the founder to trespass their knowledge as the salesperson. To replicate himself is almost impossible. And
Hmm.
the startups who usually grow until 1 million, 3 million, just with the founder selling, they can build the processes and sort of the system they need to get salespeople on board. So I think that's a huge problem. We've seen teams go from 12 people to 40 people in 6 months, and that takes a huge toll on the organization. And
Yeah.
we've seen companies who had 45 people, then they've lost runway and having a hard time. They go back to 15 people and they are selling the same. So I think for founders, the solution is not more people.
Hmm.
The solution is a better team. Sometimes people delegate too much. So we've seen the best teams. Today we met a company that is selling $2 million in annual recurring revenue with 12 people. But then when you see those teams grow so much, I think that's a huge risk. And that is a problem that money brings. Money
Hmm.
brings also the problem of course, marketing spend. And it also requires a very strong founder who knows his unit's economics, who is, I think, one of the most important KPIs is the burn multiple.
Hmm.
That is what measures how fast you're growing versus how much you're burning, and if that is efficient or not. And it's not an indicator that many entrepreneurs here in Latin America have on their head, but it's something that they should be super focused in, because then they start burning too fast. They're not growing
Yeah.
fast enough, and that is when you have problems with cash and trying to secure your next round.
So if you were to condense the kinds of focus that successful companies in that you've noticed in your portfolios, like what would it be? Like is it, to me it sounds like transference of efficient, not efficient, but more like deep transference of knowledge. The founders need to be the initial salespeople, right? Smaller
Yes.
teams.
Yes, I think it would be first of all to be very result oriented, to sort of know the unit of economics of your
Yeah.
company, So you can measure what your experiments are actually producing, right? Is it
Mm,
iteration
experiments.
and this startup mentality? So how are you really growing? Are you growing profitably or are you growing at a loss? Is where we're seeing that a lot of entrepreneurs in Latin America fail. So you have these huge growth metrics, and then we had a company who had 100 clients, and at the end, only 20 were profitable. He had to close down all the rest. So I think
Mm,
sort of this blitz scaling and this mentality that you have to grow at all costs is no longer the title in Latin America. You cannot grow at a loss because there's not enough money in the market to do so.
yeah,
So
yeah.
you really do have to think for Series A, you have to be profitable. And many people will debate this. I think it's very debatable. But
It
if
sounds like a
you're
recursion. It sounds like a recursion. Recursion, like blitzscaling was the hot thing. Before that was a traditional way of doing business and being scrappy about it, right? But growing slowly. But it seems like we're the best
yes,
companies are recursing back to that kind of mindset, prior mindset.
I think that's very important in Latin
Mm,
America. Even
mm,
there's a stronger sense of that because if you can't raise infinitely, then you have to build a sound business model that can survive. Um, and entrepreneurs are also getting tired of asking for money. I think for them, it's also how do we sort of conciliate growing a lot versus being profitable because of course
mm,
it's hard, it's a hard relationship to balance,
yeah.
but at the end you have a more stable business, a more solid business, and than what we thought before with all these companies that just burn money at the
Mm,
start. You will have to, but eventually you will need to have good pricing, you would need to have a good value proposition, and you need to grow sustainably because there are no longer that amounts of capital in the market.
mm. So yeah, like that's pretty like insightful, right? About like how companies should operate, especially in Latin America. So talking about like companies, you gave us a intro of what New Ventures is, right? It's 4 years old right now, right? And you're building thematic funds. Would you like to talk more about that? Like what you guys are
Yes.
doing now?
So basically, we're seeing there's a lot of multi-sectoral funds, right? So there's not that many thematic funds in Latin America, but we
Mm,
believe there's a power in that you get to build better networks, build specific knowledge. So we do feel that in the next 10 years, we're going to see a lot of more thematic funds. It's also interesting because we sort of dictate what dictates us is sort of the investors, right? The limited partners. And what we're seeing is that they want to impact specific mandates that they have,
mm,
either, I don't know, women's health or climate. So there's this huge transition between philanthropy and impact investing. And philanthropy, there's many families who are now looking into changing their philanthropy strategies into impact investing. So there's a huge opportunity. Right now, we launched recently our new fund, which is going to have sort of two sectors: climate resilience and quality of life, which includes
mm,
healthcare, education, and financial inclusion. We're going to have two separate teams in each sort of thematics, with their specific knowledge. And
mm,
what we are envisioning is to really look for the new solutions that are going to help Latin America. We're going to be deeply one of the continents which is not to blame for climate change. We don't produce that many CO2, but we're going to be one of the most affected.
mm.
So how can we build and invest in the technologies that are going to sort of protect the new generations? Is something that we look forward to doing.
Gotcha. So, like, talking about the thematic funds, right? I'm curious because, like, you mentioned a lot of the startups in South America have a very strong um, analog component to it, like that are there's a partner locally who could like help the customer or the product user, like move along the or use the product or get to know it better. One thing that I think we kind of like skipped is how is adoption of AI over there in Latin America, right? Is the public primed for using stuff? Like, do people will people start using agents very soon?
I think to understand Latin America, we sort of have to understand sort of the challenges in terms of poverty, access to education. So
Mm,
a lot of the population is still in survival mode. They work a day, they eat, they don't have a house, they're living rent today. Entonces, that part of the population, well, is AI is completely inaccessible to them. They're
mm,
not gonna they're not gonna be sort of using this technology. Then we have another sort of foundational problem. For example, here in Colombia, there's not internet access in the entire country. So it's sort of
yeah, that's true. Yeah.
you want to do AI, but you don't even have Wi-Fi. So I think that is why we sort of try to work in the infrastructure themes. I'm seeing it amongst sort of my colleagues. People are using it. I think
Mm,
Claude integrated Claude as well. We have our agents. We're doing our first memos and sort of playing with it. So I think it is going to be transformational. I think people do want to use it, but I think the question is, do we have the infrastructure to do this sort of democratically, or is it
mm.
just a very small 5% of the of the population who
The
is
privilege to have
yeah,
internet.
privilege, which is very unfair, right?
Yeah.
Um, but for now, it's not being included in schools, sort of at a national scale or anything. So
Mm,
I think we are there. We had our first AI summit last week, and people didn't get to. There was so many people; it was crazy. So I think there's a huge interest. I think it's going to change the way we work. Um, but I think we have to be realistic on the foundations we need for people to use it, and how can we invest in those.
correct. It sounds like accessibility to it is a core problem, and you need foundational stuff like internet. So yeah, I want to I have to say, like, we're getting to like the later parts of the podcast, but would love to ask two final questions before we slow down the boat, so to speak. Um, so just chatting, thinking about it from a founder point of view in Latin America, right? You invest across climate, fintech, health, employability. What does a founder in any one of those sectors need from you that a sector specialist fund can't give them?
Data sector specialists. So what type of support do they need? So I think a founder at the end sort of, and I learned this from a professor in college. You need someone who can sell, right? To sell to an investor, sell to attract their team, and sell to their clients. So someone who is super eloquent in that. I think that's tough, but they need an investor who can open doors for them, because as we discuss sort of the foundational problems we have, this is a very elite community in Latin
Mm,
America. There are very few funds. It's always the same type of people. There is sort of this, it's tough to break in this industry. So I think how can we bring people from more backgrounds, I think is very important. And I think at the end is how can you build access to those high level connections? Because and in the US, it sort of happens as well. Not everyone invests in the Stanford graduate who has this profile, who fits this role, and it's very stereotyped. But what we want to do here in Latin America, what about the founder who speaks broken down English but has an amazing idea, but will
my
probably
product,
never
yeah.
fundraise because he has all these barriers that the education hasn't given him. So we really work in New Ventures Capital to open those doors. Your next board member, your new commercial introduction, your strategic partner. So that is most of my day to day is how can I put my network to disposition of the entrepreneur and help him get those right connections so he can scale.
Hmm.
Which is sometimes we go back to the point of it's not about the money
Hmm.
because it's more about sometimes who you know and how can that person help you. Um, so I think that that is what it takes to be a good investor, being able to do that
Yeah.
and um, and having sort of that confidence and that trust relationship with founders for them to feel comfortable enough to call you and say, I need a new CTO, I need to meet this hospital, and how can we help?
Yeah. So appreciate that. So I wanted to like share this last question here based on our conversation about the medical um, sector being a huge opportunity here if you really factor in the female perspective into it, right? You describe the women's health gap as both a research failure and a market opportunity. If the market incentive exists, why hasn't the capital closed it already? And what does it actually require from investors who want to change that?
Okay, so let me if I understood, pro what can investors change in order to invest better or to sort of break those barriers?
Oh, what is it? What is it? What do you need from investors who want to change this paradigm?
So I think for investors, I think it starts with sort of an open mind. I think this concept of how we are reinventing venture capital for Latin America is a conversation that has to be that we need to have, and sort of question what are the infrastructure and foundations that I need for more startups to become successful. Because I think that the toughest part is adoption. And now we're seeing that right now you can build an application using AI, you can do all this stuff, but really the winners are the ones who are close to their customers and can create that customer journey that creates engagement, that creates loyalty. um, so I think for investors it's important to have more diverse people making decisions. I think it's important to have people from different backgrounds, and not we don't all have to come from the same universities from.
Mm,
So I think that that is something that needs to change, and of course having more women in the to understand these fields, so that people are not investing in women's health because if you're pitching to a partner who has never had menopause and who probably doesn't care because he hasn't had to live the hot flash.
yeah, or
Well,
it's not in their experience.
so I think it's very logical those changes. um so I think my challenge for Latin America investors is how can you be more contrarian? How can we build an ecosystem where we can get those exits?
Mm,
Maybe not how we envisioned in Silicon Valley. Maybe we have to adjust our risk. Maybe we have to adjust our reward. But definitely always thinking about the exit, right? That's why we're here
mm,
for. And I think in Latin America, we've all become very good investors, but when it comes to the exit, we're always missing the most crucial part. So
mm,
we need the generations of fund managers that came before me who opened so many doors. Well, now they need to show the returns,
mm.
and I think that's the biggest gap we have right now. So that is where I think we could join forces or be much more driven to sort of invest in a company that has a valuable exit, and maybe it's not 100 million, maybe it's 15.
Mm.
And how can we sort of adjust our theses and our risk reward models
Yeah.
if we're not seeing those unicorns, right?
Yeah. So yeah, it's about success and letting it compound. And yeah, like Daniela, like I have to say, like it's been a really insightful conversation, and I really appreciate like um, you and your team having such a practical lens about like what it takes to like uh, build or rather back companies in South America, right? And having an impact mission driven component to it. So I want to say like I had a really good time learning. I think the crowd here or the people that are going to be watching will also like learn a lot. So so for folks who want to get in touch with you, right, and who want to explore the Latin American market, how what's the best way that they could reach you?
I think through LinkedIn, you can find me through LinkedIn, Daniela Pacheco, New Ventures Capital, and I would be happy to engage and share all my knowledge about Latin America and and how I could be helpful.
Beautiful. Okay, I'll be able to I'll be sure to paste that in the show notes. Okay, Daniela, thank you for joining us, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for listening in.
Thank you, Edward. It was such a